What is up, ladies and gents? You know what time of day it is. It's XCN time, and in today's video we're going to be talking all about XCN. We're going to be discussing what we are seeing here on the charts, and I'll be giving you guys my price prediction for XCN over the coming days and weeks, as well as my targets for 2025. So be sure to stay tuned for all of that. Of course, if you are a new viewer, then welcome to this channel. If you do like this sort of content, hit the like button and subscribe for more. If you are a returning viewer, as always, welcome back to the channel. It's great to have you all here. So, of course, we're going to start off with the shorter term here on XCN. Then we're going to move on to the 2025 targets. And as you guys can see, we are on the 4-hour chart right now. And on the shortest of time frames, what we could be seeing here on XCN, which is something bullish, is the fact that we are starting to see this falling wedge pattern on the XCN chart. So, of course, as you guys can see, for the past few weeks, this downtrend, which has been taking XCN quite a bit lower, has basically been consolidating in between these two white lines. And of course, this is a falling wedge pattern, and that means if we see a breakout to the upside of this upper resistance line, which currently sits 0.014, then we could see this short-term pump here on XCN. Now, of course, drag this measuring tool to where we see a breakout here from the upper resistance line. Let's just say that happens tomorrow. We could be looking at a price target here of 0.019 on XCN, so a 37% upside. So this is potentially something that we could be looking at over the next few days. However, if we zoom out here on the XCN chart, we have a little bit more of a mixed bag. Of course, I'm going to start off with the positive news first and foremost, and that is the fact that we still have this triangle pattern. Now, of course, if I draw the resistance for the XCN price that we've seen since April and the support that we have here, we can see that XCN had been consolidating in this longer term triangle. Of course, we saw a clear breakout to the upside of this triangle, which occurred at the start of July, and technically it's not been invalidated because we are still above the resistance. Now, as you can see, we are tantalizingly close to this resistance, so if we do see the prices fall down below, that would be very, very bad. But technically, as of right now, I still think that this triangle could be in play. Of course, we do have a price target that we're looking at here on XCN of the distance of the first test of support to the first test of resistance, and that gives XCN a price target here of 0.057. So big price target stemming from this consolidation that we've seen here on XCN. And of course, what we also have is the moving average quite close by. So if I go on the 1-day chart, you can see that this blue line here on XCN has generally supported the price in the uptrend. So of course, as you can see, since 2024, prices have come down to this blue moving average on numerous occasions to basically test it as support and bounce from it. And right now, if history repeats itself, we should see a bounce from this area because this is where the 200-day moving average lies. So this kind of supports the theory that we should be heading up. So those were the reasons to be optimistic here on XCN, but we also have a few things that don't look so great. Of course, first and foremost, we have the MACD showing us that we are seeing clear bearish momentum. We've got these red bars underneath here showing us that momentum in the slightly longer terms are just generally bearish. And of course, if we go on the 1-week MACD, we still got red bars here. Of course, if we do see a crossover here on the 1-week MACD, that would present to us a very good buy signal. So I do think we could get some good buying signals in the near future here on XCN if prices do head down. But for now, the momentum is telling us that we could be heading lower. And on top of that as well, if we look at XCN's history, if we just look at the price action that we saw from January to April, we had a few of these, where we were monitoring a certain resistance. It looked like that we saw a breakout, but indeed the XCN price just kept on heading downwards. So in fact, if I go on the 4-hour chart so you guys can see what happened here in January, and let me just remove that moving average, we were basically monitoring a resistance that looks like this. If you remember, if you were here for XCN during this time period, you'll remember this little pump that we had at the start of March when we had that Goliath news come out. Now, of course, this looks like a clear breakout to the upside from this resistance. But what continued to happen here on XCN was instead of honoring the breakout to the upside, the prices came back down to test this resistance as a support, and the prices kind of just fizzled out here on XCN for quite a bit longer before we saw this 4x pump. Now, of course, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And what I'm just worried about is that we could see a similar scenario here on XCN, where the prices gave us this false breakout to the upside, and prices do something like this where we just trickle downwards a little bit more, kind of following the resistance in the same way that we saw back in January, February and March. And of course, at some point in the future when the markets get more bullish, I do think that we could see still a massive pump to the upside. So there's no doubt that in the longer term I am still bullish here on XCN, but in the shorter term I do think that we could see a scenario here on XCN where the prices just fizzle out for quite a bit longer before we see yet another pump. So just to recap everything I've said, in the very, very short term, so over the coming days, we could see a short-term pump that takes us to 0.019. Of course, we also technically have the price target from this triangle, which is still potentially in play, that sits at 0.057. But what I think is likely if we don't pump soon is something where we see a repeat of March and April here in Onyxcoin, where the price just fizzles out before we see it now, before we see the next large pump here on the charts. Now, of course, if you guys want to get $10 completely free to buy some XCN before we see another large pump, then don't forget to check out the MEX exchange. As you can see on the screen, they're giving $10 to every new user who signs up using the link in the description down below. This exchange does not require KYC to get started. All you need to do is deposit some fiat and crypto into your new account, and then you'll get that $10 straight away. So like I say, you can use it to buy some XCN, or you can long or short XCN with up to 20 times leverage with it using the MEX futures. Of course, link for this is in the description down below. Thank you guys so much for your support. Let's get back into this video. So of course we have potential triggers that could start the next pump here on XCN, and what I'm mainly watching for right now for another pump here on XCN to occur is a breakout of the larger cap cryptos. So here on Ethereum, which is by the way the largest altcoin, so this is going to have a big influence on other altcoins as well. As you see, we have this 5-year long consolidation pattern here on the Ethereum chart. Of course, you can see that basically since 2020, we've been locked in this triangle. Now, as you can see, we are really close to breaking out of this upper resistance line that's been in play for the past 5 years. And if that does occur, so if Ethereum breaks out past 3,900 with a lot of force, that could send crypto much, much higher. Of course, this in itself gives Ethereum a 5-figure target. And of course, as Ethereum breaks out to the upside, we should see other large caps follow suit. Now, of course, XCN is a smaller cap crypto, so what we would expect to see is not much to begin with. We might see a little bit of a pump as these larger cap cryptos like Ethereum are going to the moon. But for a while, we would see those larger caps perform better than XCN. If you remember, back in 2024, XCN is in the same category as XRP, but XRP obviously took the limelight back in November. It did a massive 6x during November 2024, whilst XCN only did this 2x. So in that time frame, larger caps were doing a lot better, but then 2 months later, after the fact, we saw XCN do this massive 20x pump to the upside. Now, of course, I would expect the same thing once again if we see large caps pumping. Of course, if we see Ethereum going a lot higher and other coins as well, which are showing us similar patterns. We've covered XLM, for example, because it's showing us the same long-term pattern. If we see these large caps break out of these long-term structures, we will see them take the limelight for the first few weeks, potentially the first month or two, and then we see XCN, in my opinion, follow suit afterwards. So of course, that is something that makes me very bullish here on XCN for the slightly longer term. The fact that the market structure is looking very good at the moment. Of course, what we also have as well is seasonality on our side. So basically, Q4 historically has been a very good period for crypto. We generally tend to see cryptos perform their best in Q4 and Q1. So Q4 is just October to December. Right now we are in August, but given the timelines of everything, I do think that by October we could see yet another massive pump here on XCN. So basically, I'm bullish for the next few months as we head into Q4, but for the shorter term over the next few weeks, we could, like I say, see the scenario where we just head downwards following this resistance down a little bit. So just prepare yourselves for that scenario. Of course, for the longer term, so my 2025 targets here for XCN, I am still, like I say, very, very bullish. And my price targets still remain unchanged despite what is happening in the shorter term. Now, my price targets, as you can see, fall along these Fibonacci levels. And the reason we do use these Fib levels here for XCN is because, as you can see, XCN respects them as places of support and resistance. So there's been plenty of times where XCN has come to these Fib levels to test them as supports and resistances. So when XCN makes new highs here past the $0.05 region, we can expect these Fib levels above the 1 Fib to act as places where we could see some resistance in XCN. So the two main Fibs that I've got my eye on are these two upper Fibs here. So the first one, 1.272, just to be complete, is sitting at 0.11. If we get past that, we can get to the next natural target here for XCN is 0.17, and this is also where the previous all-time high was for XCN. So this in itself is going to be a big target in my opinion. If we can break new all-time highs here on XCN, next target sits at 0.32, and that's the golden fib there, the 1.618 fib. So those two targets are my main targets here for XCN in 2025. Like I say, I do think that's going to happen a few weeks to a few months after we see larger caps breaking out of their longer term structures. Of course, what we also want to see as well, if we go on the CoinMarketCap homepage, are these two indicators showing us values very close to 100. So of course, both of the indicators are out of 100. And basically, the higher, the better. Now, the fear and greed index tells us what the emotion is like in the markets. The closer to 100, the more positive the emotion, we get euphoria and we get more risk-taking investors. And of course, altcoin season also reflects that as well. The closer to 100, the more altcoins are generally outperforming Bitcoin, which is basically a measure of risk appetite. So ideally, what we want to see is the fear and greed index at least 80, the altcoin season index at least 75. And when that occurs, that is going to be very bullish for smaller cap cryptos like XCN, and it's going to give it the best possible chance of reaching these upper price targets. So this is more of a longer term thing. If you're a longer term holder here on XCN or any other crypto for that matter, basically when these values get close to 100, this is a decent warning sign to tell you that we're pretty close to a market top here in crypto. And the good news is, if you're watching this video now, that these values here are nowhere near where the targets are. So technically, in that sense, you are still early to crypto. So, of course, that is what I wanted to say here for this video on XCN. Of course, hopefully this was helpful for you. Let me know down in the comments if you are still holding your XCN. I definitely am, particularly for the longer term. Of course, let me know as well if you want me to cover any other cryptos on this channel. Just drop the ticker down in the comments below. If the chart looks good, then I will make a video about it. Of course, guys, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.